Right now, there are hundreds of millions of people that are suffering due to an unstable economy, poverty, starvation, and disease, with no way to help themselves out of this crisis. With a globalized economy, we can help them rise and start helping themselves and others like them. As the first speaker of said proposition, I will be stating a couple of our contentions. Contention 1. With economic globalization, there will be an even starting point for all nations all over the world in terms of technology, education, and economy, as well as basic foundational laws to protect the people. According to Victoria Flower, there are currently 166 developing countries in the world with little to no access to new technology like medicine, housing, and proper forms of education. Many of these problems are tied to their lack of economic relevance on a global scale. Because their economies are suffering, there is a severe shortage of jobs for their citizens and little money for governments to put towards educational, technological, and medical institutions. With an economy that spreads all over the world, the developed countries will be more aware and able to help these countries to get to a point where they can support themselves. This will prevent them from being taken advantage of. And the reason that developed countries like the US and China would want to help these people is not only out of the good of their hearts, which leads me to my second contention. Now, if the developed countries want to help these underdeveloped countries, they actually will be able to further their own economy. Since the developed country's land is mainly used to house its population or industrialization, this leaves little land to produce food. In fact, the severe industrialization makes it even harder to grow things. China, for example, as of 2015, has a total arable land of about 119 million hectares. Since 2005, arable land in China has been on the decline, and the total arable land per citizen has reached 0.2 acres. As a percentage, agricultural land, mainly mining for things like coal, iron ore, and petroleum, etc., makes up about 54.7% of the land. In addition, 20% of the land there is used for housing. This leaves about 25%, not even including all the roads and airports in China, for crops and animals to support 1.38 billion people. If China decides to support a poor country that has plenty of empty land due to its poor economy, they will be able to put this land to use, having large plantations and animal farms and other things like raw materials shipped in from places like Africa. And in exchange, the poor country's government will finally be able to give its people proper education, a stable economy, fair and just laws, and a military to protect its people. This will create a strong and beneficial bond for both sides, and this will lead me into my final contention. As countries receive millions of new products from all over the world, there will be an extremely diverse and effective market leading to technological growth. According to the National Academic Press, technology transfer is usually a two-way, back-and-forth process of communication. This means that knowledge and ideas will be shared and studied all over the world and returned with hundreds if not thousands of different perspectives. And this, in turn, will lead to an era of hyper-advancement in all technological fields. Consumers receiving a product will be able to send feedback to the manufacturer, who can then send that feedback to the schools and labs that are developing this technology. This could aid in curing deadly diseases, creating refined forms of current technology, evolve education, and even allow more discoveries every day. All these will improve and even save lives around the world. And that is why I am proud to propose.
So I have a question about how China is using, how larger companies can use land in less developed countries, because as I said before, a lot of the working conditions that larger developed countries and companies are setting on lesser developed countries are really bad. So I was wondering how that could work, because lesser developed countries are getting bad conditions still, even though larger companies are putting lesser developed countries at use.
That's what. So our first contention about, our second one was about how we will help these lesser developed countries up to a point where they can have their own laws to protect their people, so that they won't be taken advantage of, like you said in your contentions.
But wait, so I'm confused because wait, can you clarify what you said? Just clarify what you said.
Basically, we will help the lesser developed countries to a point
But
where,
how? Like, how are you going to help them?
By giving them financial support and
Like the larger companies is helping the lesser developed countries? Or like who?
like because in return, the more developed countries will be able to receive raw goods and will be able to receive raw goods like ores and like crops from the lesser developed countries because they have so much land, empty land. That trade will be able to help them get to a point where they can help themselves and have laws to protect the workers.
Okay, but like currently, like the workers aren't getting like having bad working conditions and have like not getting paid enough wages. So if that's going on right now, then why shouldn't what you just said why isn't that happening? Because like
We're going to get there. That's happening now. That's why we're trying to work toward a point where they can have laws to protect themselves.
so isn't that? Can you clarify that again?
So you said right now there are people being mistreated in industries and things like that.
Correct.
And what we say is that we will move forward to a point where they can
But how?
help themselves.
How are you going to? Because like it's been happening, like because larger companies are like going to lesser developed countries and working for like having them work for them. But how are they going to improve? Because like what are you going to do? Basically, what I'm asking is how are the larger companies and countries going to help the lesser developed countries? Like how? Because like currently, like I said before,
By giving them access to newer technology like medicine.
but why hasn't that been happening now?
Because we haven't gotten to that point yet. We're still economic globalization is still a new sort of thing. And we're going to, with constant trade and trade of technology and materials and food, things like that, we will get to a point where we can. So in this debate, we on side proposition stated in our first contention that with economic growth, there will be a fair starting point for all countries and that they will not be taken advantage of. In our second contention, we explained in detail why developed countries would want to take care of these developing countries. In our final contention, it was said that a globalized economy will lead to an era of hyper advancement in all technological fields. On the other side, we refuted side opposition's first contention with that developed countries will take advantage of developing countries, and we said to that many countries are already getting laws to prevent them from being taken care of, and that we will help them to a point where they can't be taken advantage of by other developed countries. We refuted the second contention of the expansion of the black market with that there will be more people with jobs that are related to preventing the black market from spreading, and that in turn will prevent their point from happening. And in their final contention of how the industry will be monopolized, we responded with that the small businesses can still exist on a local or national scale, and that they won't be completely shunted to the side. So our second contention of why developed countries would want to help these developing countries, we stated that if we, the developed countries, offer new technology and medical support to the people of the developing countries, we will face fewer problems like the banana farm incident that they mentioned, and that this will be better for everyone. And that is why I'm proud to propose. There are plenty of bad people who became leaders throughout history. The only reason they didn't take over is that other people have been able to stop them and take them down. With economic globalization, these rulers will be able to harm everyone across the world as long as they have the guts to do it. As the first speaker of side opposition, I will first be stating our case, some of our contentions, and then moving on to refutations if time allows. Contention 1. A globalized economy is very fragile because each country will get used to relying on others for things like food, raw materials, financial support, etc. We already know that certain countries will inevitably become reliant on others. The US is actually a prime example. They have $3.1 trillion worth of imported goods from all over the world. This heavy reliance on others means that even if one country collapses due to anything, such as a natural disaster or rebellion, they will cease sponsorship to support themselves. This will cause a chain of events that will cause the sponsored countries to also withdraw their sponsorship and make up for the lack of import, just like in the case of the Great Depression. The same could happen in the case of a global conflict. Countries will be dragged into fighting because of trade alliances, much as the same as in World War I. With the collapse of one country, the entire system will collapse. This will cause a recession on a global scale and the deaths of thousands. This will spread. With the spread of technology, there will be an even higher chance of dangerous weapons getting into the hands of the wrong people, making our point about the dangers of globalization even greater. The few who manage to survive the recession will move to other countries where jobs are more stable, and this will be damaging to the economy of the developed countries, as many have already lost a significant portion of their workforce to developing countries. This brings me to my second contention. Since developing countries tend to have lower manufacturing and production costs, businesses will move overseas to save money. This will derive people in developed countries of jobs. This doesn't benefit the workers in developing countries either, as business owners will take advantage of the lack of labor laws to exploit their new workers. This has already happened, with many companies being accused of social injustices and some countries even passing laws that restrict the rights of workers. The Hobbit Law in New Zealand affects workers' right to strike action, holidays, and sick pay. Also, in places like Moldova, Egypt, and Russia, just to name a few, there are laws that prevent people, mainly women, from working at all. In addition, companies in developing countries often sell products for a lower price, which will force companies in developed countries to do the same. If they want to attract consumers, however, those companies will have to cut costs in other areas to continue the profit, and will instead cut workers' pay and other expenses. Economic globalization will only make this more common as more workers travel to other countries. That increased travel will lead to a spread of disease, which I will elaborate in my third contention. History has shown that as people and goods travel from one country to another, disease inevitably travels with them. The disease can be transported in people, produce, or animals, and is difficult to combat, being the highest contributor to human mortality. Recently, there has been a massive increase of tuberculosis in the United States, which has been attributed to HIV and AIDS, both of which are not native to the Americas. They originated in Africa. The only way for them to have spread to America is to have been carried. The only way disease could have been carried such a distance had been through trade. We know this because immigration to the United States from African countries, is not common. In fact, immigrants from Africa are so uncommon that they are not even mentioned in statistics, meaning that these diseases were not carried by humans, but rather by food, animals, and insects. And a globalized economy will only make this worse, and that is why I am proud to oppose. In this debate, we outside opposition stated in our first contention just how fragile the system is and how it's more likely to fall apart, leading to consequences on a global scale. In our second contention, we mentioned how the workers will be taken advantage of and will be mistreated, which can lead to lifelong health impacts and even deaths. The opposing side didn't mention any specific refutations and only mentioned China which is still in fact considered a developing country, as an example. So that point still stands. And going back to our first contention, all they said was that there would be a less chance of this happening, but they didn't give any proof or any sources for this claim. So that point still stands. For our third contention, they mentioned that medications will be able to combat this bioevolution of diseases, but as my partner mentioned in her refutation, that they're only looking at the short term, and eventually technology will not be able to keep up. On the other hand, the pro side first contention was that it will increase general welfare. Their first subpoint was that there will be cheaper goods, and we say to that, in relation to our second contention, that there will be a race to the bottom. They also mentioned more technology, but more technological advancements. But that also means that there will be more dangerous weapons out there circulating in this global trade. And with the race to the bottom, as mentioned in reputation, there will also lead to pay cuts for the workers and worker exploitation. They also mentioned that it will boost the economy, but we say to that, that actually will not. Like my partner mentioned in her example of the Dhaka factory collapse, and how that with the race to the bottom, the money that they gain from working at these companies will not be enough to support their lives, and they would be better off trying to sustain themselves using things like farming and selling their own crops. And finally, their second contention of how it would mitigate violence, and they basically just mentioned that there would be more sanctions, but as we said in our refutation, that sanctions will not be enough, and that there actually be an increased amount of violence as we stated in our claim. And that is why I'm proud to oppose.